My name is Sharon Fitzpatrick, and I'm your co-host for today's webinar, The 5-Point Formula for Powerful Presentations with critically acclaimed author Simon Morton. Thank you to our sponsor, Brainshark, and Joan Babinski for joining us today. Thank you also to Dave Zielinski, our editor, who is joining me as co-host. Today's webinar is part of our Expert Thinking program. We have offered a robust peer-to-peer community in our Google Plus community, as well as resources and other places that you can start on discussions. Usually we're on Wednesdays. We have webinar Wednesdays, but today we're on totally Tuesday. So in addition, you can see we've offered a number of sessions that are available on YouTube or on our website. And we have great engaging conversations like we'll have today with people like Rick Altman, Gitesh Bajaj, Mike Parkinson, Ellen Finkelstein, Nolan Hams, and others. Feel free to tweet. We'd love to hear from you. And the hashtag is #PresentationXpert. At this time, what I'd love to do is turn this over to Dave Zielinski and give him a chance to introduce our two speakers.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm very pleased to introduce Joan Babinski, co-founder and vice president of marketing with Brainshark, the sponsor of today's webinar. Brainshark enables companies to improve productivity with cloud-based business presentation solutions for sales, marketing, and training. The company's customers include half of the Fortune 100 and over 2,000 enterprises. I'm equally pleased to introduce our other speaker today, Simon Morton. Simon's early career as an executive for an international technology company exposed him to more PowerPoint presentations than were probably good for him. As founder of the firm Eyeful Presentations, based in the UK and with 6 international offices, Simon has been ridding the world of death by PowerPoint for over 10 years. In his new book, The Presentation Lab, Learn the Formula Behind Powerful Presentations, Simon shares the methodology and approach that has driven Eyeful's success and that of its world-class clients. And with that, Simon, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Dave. It's a real pleasure to be speaking with everybody today. Thank you very much to the legions of people behind the scenes that have been helping set all this up. So thank you very, very much. Let's just get the first slide up. We're kind of limited with time. Anybody that's seen me speak or heard me speak in the past will be aware that I can go on for hours. But the good news is that that Sharon, Joan, and Dave have told me under pain of death I've got 45 minutes, so we best crack on. For me, what I'd like to get out of today for you guys is fundamentally 3 things. I'd love the opportunity for everybody that's carving time out of your busy day to walk away with 3 things. I'd like you to start thinking differently about presentations. Now that might seem a strange thing to ask, especially when you've taken the time, you've been proactive enough to actually tune into this webinar, but I still think there's a really important phase that we all have to go through in terms of our presentation developments, which is just about sort of resetting ourselves. And hopefully this short webinar will be a catalyst to that process. Equally, off the back of thinking differently, I'd like to share with you some ways of acting differently. This hasn't anything to do with technology. It's about the way that you approach presentations. And what's been really interesting, listening to Sharon sort of pull out some of the ideas and the messages and the questions that are already arising, we'll cover off a whole bunch of stuff in Act Differently. And then finally, you guessed it, we're going to get you to deliver differently as well. And delivering differently isn't about soft skills. It's not about how to stand and how to use your hands and how to project your voice. It's about thinking about your audience and how you can best engage them on their terms. So for me, that's a big thing. And what we're going to do is, as per the advertised feature, we'll be breaking these 3 elements down into sort of 5 key ingredients. And hopefully those 5 key ingredients will prove really useful as you sort of step away from the PC and start thinking about your next presentation. So let's crack on and start looking at the think differently piece. And frankly, think differently is by far the most difficult thing I'm going to ask you to do today. What's really strange, a really peculiar situation, is that over time we have become programmed to think about presentations in a particular way. And it's almost like a knee-jerk reaction. If I say presentation, probably the first thing that springs to mind is PowerPoint. And we've got that all wrong. What we need to do is we need to think about presentations in a much bigger way. So forget the technology. That's merely a vehicle for you to get your message across to your audience. We have to think seriously about presentations and not see them as a task, not see them as something on our list of things to do today, along with doing emails and all the other things that clutter up our lives. We need to take presentations and think about them in a way that sort of reflects the privilege that they truly are. It's a real privilege, and I'm not just saying this, it's a real privilege to be speaking to you today. And it's a privilege on many levels. It allows me to share some of my views and my thoughts around presentations, which is something I'm immensely passionate about. But I'm also very aware that you've carved time out of your busy day to listen to me share my ideas. So if I'm not delivering information that really is of value to you, then I've wasted your time and I've wasted my time. So whenever I approach developing a presentation, whenever I approach delivering a presentation, I think very, very differently to most people out there now. But it doesn't come naturally, and if I may, I'll share one of many personal stories. And it goes back to the book, and we'll be giving away 5 copies of this book towards the end of the event. So hopefully you're one of the lucky 5 people. But writing the book was in equal parts a joyous experience and pure hell. It was pure hell. After about 3 months of writing, I printed it all off and viewed the work that I'd done, and frankly it was awful. It was boring, it was trite, it was the same old stuff rehashed, and it didn't excite me at all. And I understandably kind of panicked, because a publisher's deadline never moves, and we are already in a marketplace where there are some fantastic presentation books out there, and I knew I had a good, valuable addition to the library in me, but after 3 months of writing, I read it and it was awful, and I had to step back and sort of try and understand why that had happened. And it had happened for the same reason that most presentations fail. And it's because I sat at my desk and I just did it. I looked upon writing the book as a task, not as an opportunity. And so every morning I would come in an hour early and I would just hammer out a whole bunch of stuff on the assumption that if I threw enough content into my Word document, there would be some good stuff in there. And like I say, in retrospect, there really wasn't. So what I had to do is I had to take myself away from my day-to-day working environment, which frankly is a really lovely environment. It's creative. I'm surrounded by lovely, creative people. It sort of ticks all the boxes. But because I associate it with my day-to-day work, it wasn't working. So I ended up sort of booking myself into a hotel in a place called Crewe, which is officially the most boring town in the UK, and did nothing but write and write and write. And off the back of that, I then came up with content that means I'm now very, very proud of the book that you've got in front of you. And that's what we need to do when it comes to presentations. We need to sort of be quite drastic in our approach. We need to think differently about it, because if we don't, we end up with slides that look like this. Now, we can all point and laugh at this slide. Seth Godin, who is one of my sort of marketing sort of idols, voted this the worst PowerPoint slide in the world ever, which is quite a claim, and for obvious reasons. that we can all highlight, a really confusing diagram, too much text, some really verbose and slightly over-the-top language. There's a whole bunch of reasons why this slide is really pretty horrible to look at. But before we point and laugh too much, let's take a bit of a reality check. And the reality check is that most corporate presentations are kind of similar to this. Every time I present this to an audience, people will nod their head and sort of scratch their chin and go, it's absolutely awful. And then a couple of brave people will stick their hands up and go, yeah, we kind of got the same sort of slides going on in our organization. And there may be some of you today looking at this going, I've done worse than this. So with that in mind, let's sort of look at the reality. And frankly, if we are equipping presenters with death by PowerPoint slides, they sort of go out there and deliver this stuff. It's either this or stand completely naked in front of an audience and try and wing it. And it takes a very, very brave and very confident presenter to go out there and actually present without slides. And so if you're responsible for developing slides maybe for your sales team or maybe for internal communications, and this is the kind of thing that your presenters are equipped with, well, you can't blame them for doing the very best they can in terms of addressing it. And part of the problem is, in my opinion, and based on working with companies large and small all over the world for the last 10 years, is an ownership of presentations. I'll talk in a moment about how important it is to understand the value of a presentation. That's a really important part of this whole thinking differently process. But ask yourself a question, and if you're taking down notes, please write this question down and just bounce it around people within your organization and within your team. Who owns the presentations within your business or within your college, within your organization? Who actually owns them? Because without ownership, you end up with slides like this. This is a perfect example of the love child of sales, bit of marketing, probably some product in there as well, and the whole thing becomes a real mess. So ask yourself the question, who owns your presentation? And then with that in mind, ask yourself the next question, have you got a whole bunch of people out there developing their own slides? Are they creating their their own do-it-yourself slides? And I've been guilty of this in the past. Prior to starting Eyeful, I was a sales guy out on the road, and before big pitches, I used to sit in front of the TV the night before the big pitch, the big presentation, and after a glass of wine suddenly feel kind of creative and find myself making changes and notes and dragging slides from other presentations and ultimately creating a real mess, a Frankensteins monster of a presentation. This is the reality of presentations today, and the scary thing is the reality has become acceptable. Your audience may be disappointed, but they sadly wouldn't necessarily be surprised if you turned up and presented a slide like this. And that's a dreadful shame. That's an awful situation for us to be in. And that's really what we want to change. And whilst I'm having a rant, and whilst I'm being relatively negative about the whole thing, let's just get a couple of other bits and pieces out of the way as well. There are no shortcuts. So if you're looking for a quick fix to the problem presentation you've got, giving your slides to a company like ours, and there are many of them out there that will take a slide and make it look prettier, you know what? It won't help. It might make the slides look prettier, but it won't make your presentation any more effective. I've said this time and time again, I'd rather be presented with an ugly bunch of slides that had a clear message, relevant content, delivered in a structured way, than a really pretty bunch of slides that made no sense to me. And that's just logic. We all get that. We all understand that. Having been audience members ourselves, we recognize that actually what this really boils down to is making sure that we connect with our audience. And fancy looking slides, they're a lovely thing to have, but only once you've done the basics and had the basics in place. The very worst thing anybody could ever say to you in the feedback they give you from your presentation is, I really like the look of your slides. actually what they should be saying is, I really understood your message. I really know what to do now. The call to action was clear. So slide makeovers, whilst they keep companies like ours nice and busy, and we'll happily work with people that have a strong story, just making them pretty doesn't make them any more effective. And also, and again, this sounds kind of strange from a company like ours that does a lot of training, but sticking people on training courses is not going to address the issue, specifically soft skills training courses. If your presenter is more worried about the way they're standing, what to do with their hands, how to project their voice, all of those things, and less worried about how your story is being told and shared with your audience, then you've got a problem. Audiences are really forgiving. They'll more than happily put up with people umming and ahhing and maybe stumbling over a few words if the content is relevant to them. They'll stay stuck to it. They'll push their way through if the relevant content is being shared with them. And if it's not, no matter how slick you are as a presenter, it doesn't really matter. And the final thing I'd say is around new technology. And as presenters today, we've never had it so good. There are new killer apps being released almost weekly to help us as presenters engage our audiences better. And that's brilliant news. That's really, really good news. The problem is where we take the old mistakes of a bad, for example, PowerPoint deck that's simply not working because the message is unclear, the content is cluttered, and there's no visual sort of visual engagement with your audience. And we take all of those problems and we take them out of PowerPoint, and then we stick them into a new technology. Could be Prezi, could be Keynote, it doesn't really matter. All you're doing is transferring all of the bad things you had in PowerPoint into a new technology. You're just putting a new wrapper around it. And that is a major problem, a major issue. And so don't embrace new technology unless it really adds value. And we'll talk about the different options out there going forward. The final thing around sort of thinking differently is just take a step back a little bit. And again, I can pull upon bitter personal experience when I share this story. Think about the time and the effort and the stakes that are at play when it comes to you actually delivering your message. There is a real balance between the vast amount of investment you put in to getting to the point of presenting and the impact, the return on investment you're going to get. So let me share this story. I worked for a US business for quite a few years, and I was fortunate enough to be asked to head up a new division, global division of the business, which was about taking a cutting edge bit of technology. I won't bore you with the details because frankly it was kind of boring, but in our little marketplace it was particularly exciting. And I was tasked to go out there and to grow a team specifically for Europe and go and take this new technology to market. So I did all of the fun stuff. I had budget, so I went out and made sure I had the right people on board. And we went out and we headhunted and we got the best people on board, and it was great, really exciting. We then did marketing. We did marketing like we've never marketed before. I was being interviewed by journalists. We were taking journalists out on jollies. The whole thing was very, very exciting. We started qualifying the marketplace we wanted to be in. It was a really exciting time. A whole bunch of money was being spent. And the good news was that slowly but surely it was all paying off. We were building ourselves a reputation within our very niche marketplace, and the opportunities started coming through, and we finally got to the point where we were starting to pitch to potentially win business, and that's where things went horribly wrong. Because I remember horribly vividly preparing for a presentation to one of the big European banks. This was a huge deal, a gazillion-dollar deal, and we all very excitedly got together and talked about the opportunity and who the audience was and what have you. And then we looked around and realized that actually we didn't really have a presentation. We didn't have the tool that would give us the return. We didn't have something that would deliver this moment of truth. Because all of the money, all of the investment, all of the time, the blood, sweat and tears that we've thrown at this thing, it was all starting to fade away purely because we hadn't thought seriously enough about the presentation that we were going to deliver. And for me, that was a real wake-up call. It was, you know what, you can get excited, you can throw lots of money at things, you can even get yourself into the privileged position of standing in front of the right people. But if you don't deliver a presentation with a clear message, with clear content, with visuals that help support and deliver your message, then frankly, all of that money has been wasted. And off the back of that, what I'd like to do now is just ask you guys, we're going to run a quick poll on understanding the audience. Before we get into something called audience heat maps, I'd just like to, at this stage, throw open a poll, and Sharon's going to sort of do all the clever techie stuff for you. And I think she's pinged you a note in chat, which is what type of audience do you normally speak to? So if you can tap your answer into that question box now, that would be great. Just want to gauge the type of audiences that you're speaking to, because audiences, as I'll explain shortly, are the most important stakeholder in the entire process.
We have a lot of sales, small business owners, potential investors, it's going so fast, healthcare workers, travel engineers, educators, chemical engineers, Boston Virtual, adult learners, lawyers, IT team, potential customers, new employees, and it can go on and on, board of directors, C-suite, employee training and development, taxpayers, many of the millenniums, university alumni, prospective students, donors, internal partners, internal education, C-suite, inventors, that's a good one.
Really, yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got the gamut, and there's still...
Yeah, we've got everybody, and I think that's the exciting thing. I speak, as you can imagine, I speak a lot on this topic now. And one of the topics that, when I speak about it, frustratingly is the least subscribed to, is internal audiences. So it's really interesting that a lot of those answers were around speaking to internal audiences. Sales audiences, yeah, are a bit of a given, and whenever I speak, if I'm speaking to a sales audience, you can guarantee the room is rammed. When I talk about internal presentations, there are a select few people that come along to that, and for me that's a really interesting sort of thing to see, because people tend to view internal audiences as kind of less important, which makes no sense. Makes no sense at all. And they go, yeah, well, it's kind of a captive audience, so they can't run away, so they've got to listen to me, so I shouldn't really have to prepare. I don't need to sell myself. Well, frankly, as I think we've just highlighted there with the number of presentations that are happening internally, they're a really important audience to be thinking about. But frankly, all audiences are important, and this is sort of the ingredient, the first ingredient on this presentation lab approach, which is, we call it audience heat mapping. And I'll sort of run through this relatively quickly, but the purpose of a heat map for me is just to take a moment out to think about who you're presenting to. Of all of the secret ingredients, this is probably my favorite, because this hit me like a bolt of lightning. It was suddenly an opportunity for us to nail an idea of trying to understand this most important stakeholder in the whole presentation process, the audience. And what we do is we kind of break it down into 3 areas. Now, this is based on some Myers-Briggs sort of psychology, but frankly, mainly experience. And I work with all sorts of different organizations and audiences, and typically you've got 3 elements, 3 ingredients in play in any audience. So speaking to you guys today, there will be a mix of if I gathered you all together, there will be a mix of factual, emotional, and visionary. And let me just talk you through each of those. Factual is that part of an audience that wants the facts. If you could present to these guys using a spreadsheet, they'd love it, because it might be about return on investment. It might, if it's a sales presentation, it's about how quickly am I going to get my money back, or what kind of deals can I get. If it's a technical presentation, it might be about the technology within a solution, or maybe the impact a drug can have. If it's an internal audience, it might be, give me the detail as to what I have to do next. And that factual element can be really, very, very important. The visionary piece, visionary is around the big picture stuff. So I'm not talking about in terms of images, I'm talking more around the impact your story, your message can have on that audience. And so it tends to be big picture stuff. This part of the audience doesn't want to get into too much detail often, but they just want to know that actually if I do this and this, I get this. And that sort of high-level stuff is important. And then the really interesting one, and the one that we always forget, is emotional. And emotional can be positive and it can be negative. In terms of emotional, it can be that your audience is excited to see you. They're excited about what you might have to share. Or they might be really negative. They might be sat there, if they're physically in front of you, they're the guys with their arms crossed, because what you're about to share may impact their role, it may impact their lifestyle, whatever it might be. So all of these three elements make up an audience. And what we do is we work with our clients, and what we would sort of ask you guys to do is start taking an approach like this whenever thinking about your presentation. And this is an example of a live heat map that we did for a client. Big technology company, they were pitching to a large US bank, and they were pitching after about 6 months worth of due diligence, and big deal. They were finally got to the final pitch, and they were presenting to an audience of procurement people, bankers and techies. And so based on procurement, techies and bankers, we assumed straight away it was going to be a very high factual audience. And because the solution they were proposing was big news, it was going to change quite a lot in the way that the bank was going to engage with its end clients. There was a lot of visionary stuff in there as well. By implementing the solution, we can do this, this and this. It's all terribly exciting. And you'll see the emotional element is not particularly big, and that was based purely on the fact that we were presenting to bankers, technologists and procurement people. So I can't remember the last time I met an emotional banker, so we kind of made that kind of quite small. And we carried on our merry way, and we started developing the presentation with this audience in mind, and it was only over coffee, just chatting away. I said, hey, tell me a little bit more about the audience. How well do you know them? And one of the guys said, yeah, we know them pretty well. We've been working with them for about 6 months now through this due diligence process. We know the names of their kids. We know where they go on holiday. There's quite a friendship there. And I think they like us. I think they trust us. And I think that's going to be an important part of this. And as soon as he said this, the heat map changed. Because actually, we'd made a whole bunch of assumptions based on job title, where actually the more time we spent thinking about the audience, the more we recognized that this audience wasn't about bits and bytes and pricing and all of that stuff. They knew that information more than the presenters did. It was about, could they trust them? Could they ring them up at 2 o'clock in the morning when the project had gone slightly awry and know that my customer, their supplier, had their back? And that for me was a real eye-opener. And that's the first ingredient that I want to share with you guys is take time, hopefully using the heat map approach, but just, even if this idea prompts you to take a little longer to think about who you're presenting to in the first place, that will have a major impact on the connection you have with your audience when you stand up there and actually deliver your message. The heat map idea is so simple. We've now got clients that won't even think about developing the presentation until they've carried out this exercise. Now, I'm not suggesting everybody does that, but I think it's a really valuable way of doing it because what it does is it ensures that you're connecting. That idea of tugging on your audience's heartstrings has a major impact on the way that you engage and make the most out of the presentation opportunity that you've got. I'm aware of time, so we'll carry through, but think differently was really important, so I was keen to spend as much time as I could there. once you start thinking differently, then you can go to town and start acting differently. And you can kind of boil presentations down into 3 elements. And it's really easy as presenters, everybody that's on the webinar now, to think, oh, presentation, got a presentation next week, I better double click on PowerPoint and start finding some really cool artwork or smart art to start telling my story. And people tend to focus very much on design, where actually the savvy guys start looking at the content, because it's the content that really is where you're able to engage with your audience. It's the content that you need to share with your audience is key. So what does your audience need to know to help them ultimately remember your message? Because your message is the one thing that your audience will remember. That's the bit they'll take home with them that night. That's the thing they'll mention over dinner to their partner or to their friends in the pub that night. If they're asked about the presentation, it's the message they should be able to share, not the content. The content's just there to support them. And one of the questions, as we were preparing for this, from one of the guys sort of listening in, was, how do I manage content? And I think there's a really simple way of doing this, is if you get to your message, really understand what message you're looking to share with your audience, your content kind of picks itself. Because content falls into 3 different groups. There's content your audience needs to know to help them take on board that message. There's content your audience already knows, so you really don't need to share it with them. And then there's content that they don't need to know. It's just noise. And with technical presentations, again, a couple of people highlighted that as being their area of interest. Technical presentations tend to fail because people have not applied the content filter carefully enough. Technical presentations are a wonderful opportunity for us to show off and demonstrate how much we know about a particular topic. And whilst that might make us feel really, really knowledgeable, your audience gets confused. So go back to your message. What message do you want your audience to take with them? Because off the back of that message, they'll carry out an action. And then with that message firmly in mind, your content will help choose itself. The content on its own and message on its own and even design on its own is no good unless you have a structure. And that's our second ingredient. It's what we call the audience pathway. And this is one of a whole heap of different structures that you can apply to a presentation. I particularly like this approach because it allows you to address a lot of the issues that dog presentations all over the world. The establish phase, that first moment of engaging your audience, shouldn't be about you. Now, I'm stating the blindingly obvious here, but that establish phase, typically in bad presentations, will be, if it's a corporate presentation, will be something along the lines of, we were founded in 1892. This is a picture of our head office. This is a map with all of our locations around the world with little pinpricks on them. A whole heap of really anodyne, boring information that gives your audience license to switch off. What you've got to do is you've got to grab the attention of your audience as early as you can, because you might be dealing with resistance in the room. There might be a few people there with their arms crossed. There might be people intrigued, can't wait to hear what you've got to say. Grab their attention, and then off the back of that, then you engage them. So that established phase could be a provocative statement. It could be a question. It's a whole heap of different ways of grabbing the attention early on, but then off the back of that, you then start engaging. You start sharing some of the content that allows your audience to understand your message, and then you move to evaluate. And evaluate is a really important part of this whole process, because this allows your audience to process the information that you're sharing. If you keep throwing content at your audience, eventually they get punch drunk. They don't know what to do with all the information that you're sharing. So step back, tell a story, share an experience, maybe share a case study of how this idea, this content, this message actually played out, maybe for another customer, internally, whatever it might be. And the final part of this pathway, and it seems again so awfully obvious, but you'd be amazed how few presentations have this, and all of them should have it, not just sales presentations. Every presentation should have a call to action. And the reason, I beg your pardon, sorry.
Before you go any further, there are a lot of questions that are coming up. I just wanted to try and
Great, fantastic.
pull them in. So one of the questions is from Richard. He said he's confused. So do we establish the boring part and then jump into the intrigue?
No, you get rid of the boring part completely. Your boring part will not help your message at all. So, for example, when you were founded and where your company locations are and how big you are is not likely to be information your audience doesn't know. They are giving you their time because they've probably done a little bit of investigation already. And so you taking 5 slides up talking about yourself is not a great way to establish that rapport with the audience early on.
That's a great question. I mean, Anthony's got a couple of questions and a comment. The really savvy guys start with paper and pencil before touching PowerPoint. So how do you change the feeds and speeds mindset of technical presentation development?
He's absolutely right. We have we follow a storyboarding process. We've got storyboard pads all over the place here, and everything starts with a pencil and a pad of paper. In terms of engaging with your technical audience, we don't even get to the paper stage until we've analysed the audience and understood what our message needs to be. So once you've done that, in terms of how you then sort of start pulling together the collateral that will help you share that story, it's sort of you're 50% of the way there before you even start writing anything down, let alone start thinking about PowerPoint.
Well, you know, Rick Altman's on joining us, and he did a webinar for us 2 weeks ago called Surviving Handout Hell, and he just sent me a note, and he said, the boring part goes in the handout, let's tie our 2 webinars together. That definitely, that's one way to get that message across if you've got to do that boring stuff. Put it in the handout.
Yeah, and I have to say, I think if you know your audience and you know that there's a strong message there, the content that you share with your audience means that there really shouldn't be any boring parts.
Well, we can always hope. I'm going to turn it back.
You're very true there. Absolutely. Cool. I mean, Audience Pathway is a seminar in itself, frankly. In terms of structure, though, that call to action, never forget that. People think about it in terms of a sales presentation. That works really effectively, of course. But again, you'd be amazed how often that's left off that type of presentation. But also internal presentations, technical presentations. You are only presenting because you want your audience to do something as a result of the information that you've shared. So ask them that question. Don't finish your presentation with thank you, because that sort of lets them off the hook a little bit. So make sure that you make the most out of that. The Audience Pathway then allows you to start building your understanding of the audience through the heat map and the pathway together. So this is where it can help start building different ways of breaking that presentation down. So the use of visuals, how you might use charts or data, how you might even use language that help take that audience through each of those different steps. So with the pathway sort of in mind, we can then, like I say, go back to the exciting stuff of figuring out with our strong message and our strong content and our strong design how we're going to actually start sharing this stuff. And as I mentioned before, we've never had it so good. As presenters, we are in a purple phase when it comes to the technology we have available to us. This is far from a definitive list of the great technology that's out there, but by God, do we have a lot to choose from. And it's actually only when you understand your audience and you understand your structure can you choose the appropriate tool to deliver that. And we do that through something called the presentation landscape. And the presentation landscape, this is a bit of a hobby horse of mine, so I'll have a very brief rant. I get really frustrated with the fact that most presentation experts, myself included, for many, many years, used to focus on one type of presentation. and that was the formal presentation. So many of the books out there, many of the webinars and all of the well-intentioned content that's out there on the web is all designed to make sure that when you stand up in front of an audience, you deliver a confident, structured presentation. And the idea is that you present, they nod, hopefully, along the way, and if they're still awake at the end, they ask you some questions. But we all know that the best engagements we have with our colleagues and with our prospects and with our customers actually are more two-way. But we've lost the plot. When it comes to presenting, because we don't arm ourselves with the appropriate tools, we end up talking at our audience. Even though they quite fancy a nice, cozy conversation, actually we end up just talking at them rather than engaging with them. So there is a desperate need for us to start delivering differently and stepping away from this awful sort of box that we've placed ourselves in, forced ourselves into around formal presentations, and actually equip ourselves with tools that prompt an interactive engagement with our audience, because that makes a huge difference to the impact that you have. And I'm sure many of the people on the webinar will be up to speed with likes of Dan Rome, who does a fantastic job at allowing people to communicate in a really informal way. Back of a napkin is a great visual way of sharing your information. It's still another presentation format. It's still a way of you telling your story. And the great presenters can tell their story in all three of these different formats. They can stand in front of an audience of 2,000 people at a conference and deliver the same story that they would do in a cozy, interactive chat with their audience around a coffee, all the way through to sat very, very casually, kind of doodling on the back of a napkin. And if you can start approaching this stuff, recognizing that you don't have to talk at your audience, you can talk with your audience, it really does allow your audience to take this stuff on and really absorb it, and really increase the retention of the message you're looking to share, massively improve the communication, and ultimately as a result of that, improve the engagement you're going to have with your audience. And that's the purpose of the presentation in the first place, is to make sure that you engage them in a way that's most appropriate. Now, to do that, we'll often use visuals. And visuals are, you don't need me to tell you that visuals are a really powerful way of engaging your audience. That's a given. And we can all pull upon various studies to demonstrate this, but for anybody that's sitting there stroking their chin going, prove it, Simon, well, I can prove it. Paul Martin Lester from California State University did a brilliant study with the snappy title Syntactic Theory of Visual Communication. And what Paul highlighted was the fact that we take information in relatively inefficiently. If we hear it, about 10% of it sort of soaks in. 20% if we're seeing something visually, but combine those two together, that goes up to a massive 80%. It's a huge leap in the quality and volume of information that we take on board. And with that in mind, we have to be really smart about the way that we use visuals as part of a presentation. And you can pull upon the likes of Rick. He's done a great book that talks about visual communication, and Nancy Duarte, she's done some fantastic work around this topic as well. But fundamentally, I think we're all singing off the same hymn sheet, which is pictures are good, text is bad. And let me share with you this really simple example. If I show you this picture here, this will automatically have started a whole bunch of thoughts and feelings and emotions and ideas and words in your head. Some of you might be thinking, that looks like a beautiful home. A home for my family. I could barbecue there, I could have friends around, be a fantastic place for Christmas, it'd be a wonderful place for us to spend summer breaks. The list goes on. It could be a really warm and positive thing. Or you might go, my Lord, that's a lot of land to mow. Whatever your response is, there will be visual subtext. There will be a response off the back of that, which is going to be really, really strong. Watch how, as I start adding little bits of information, suddenly all of those feelings, all of those senses that you had start getting chipped away. And by the time they start talking about how many bedrooms it's got and what parking it's got and recently rewired, a new roof, and suddenly it becomes a real estate specification rather than a home. Just by adding too much content onto this slide, I've changed the meaning of the slide. And so whenever you start thinking about visuals, don't start with a great visual and then kill it and strangle it slowly by then bombarding it with loads and loads of content. Make sure that when you have that opportunity, you let your visual breathe. You allow the subtext to come through loud and clear. And then we're on to the final ingredient, which is around blended presenting. But before I sort of dive into this, Joan from Brainshark is joining us and very kindly sponsoring this event. And Brainshark have been really heavily involved in dealing with remote presentation, remote presenting, and engaging with people during and after an event. And I just wanted to ask Joan, sort of how can people engage that type of presentation, that type of engagement?
Sure, thanks, Simon. Well, there's a few things that we're seeing, and we're seeing that technology is really changing the dynamics of a presentation or a meeting kind of before, during, and after. So, companies are using a blended approach to, number one, set up a successful meeting so that some of the perhaps maybe introductory things or, knowledge level setting happen before a meeting so that an interactive meeting when you're live in person, or maybe you have people remotely, but you're all there at the same time, can really be used more effectively and much more interactively. And then, we see things happening during the meeting with the use of technology. And maybe you might mention in your presentation SlideShark, but that's one of our solutions. And what we're seeing people do is use that, which is a product for the iPad and for sharing presentations across any type of device, where people are turning off the projector in the room. So say, we often rely on the projector and when we're, in a room of maybe one to a few or one to many. And what we're finding is with the ability to do things like broadcast right to people's mobile devices, we're seeing that can really change the dynamic of a meeting where people aren't looking at this big glowing screen in front of them and then their thoughts are distracted, but they're really looking at those visuals before them and listening to your story, and really can increase that engagement that you talk about.
And I think that's really interesting is that, and it's a really positive thing, all of this new technology is prompting us to think a little bit smarter about presenting and how we engage with our audiences. And the smart guys are doing exactly what you say. It's being a little bit more fluid than they ever were. So I just wanted to sort of touch on blended presenting and the use of different sort of technologies. But I know that, Sharon, we wanted to do a quick live poll, didn't we, on the type of presentation technology that people are using?
Yes, we did, and while we're doing that, we did have a question saying, Simon, can you please share the title and the author of the study you referenced regarding 10%, 20%, and 80%?
I can. It's Paul Martin Lester. I'll tell you what, I'll just have a look in the references section of the book here. And it's California State University, and the study was Syntactic Theory of Visual Communication. It's a snappy title.
Great. We've asked people to please respond. We have put a poll up, and then we'll share the results and get back to this. So we have a lot of people. Obviously, PowerPoint is the king so far. We've got about 50% of you have voted, so let's suggest that you continue to vote. We have also people who are asking, what did you use to create the presentation you're using today?
This is PowerPoint.
Great.
So, I mean, I've got these a few sort of snippets from the book, some of the visuals, but yeah, all of the animation and all of that stuff is good old PowerPoint.
I think that's the common answer. I think we're going to close the poll and just say that we've got 90% of the audience, and we are going to share the results, and you can see it's clearly PowerPoint by a landslide.
Microsoft will be pleased as punch when they see that, absolutely. And I mean, PowerPoint is great, and there's no getting away from the fact that it's the weapon of choice for the vast majority of presenters out there. And it's great because it's flexible, it allows people to engage on all manner of different platforms now. Yeah, the developments in 2013 are really cool. But I'm kind of technology agnostic, and I think that we can be using all manner of different tools. Some of the best presentations ever delivered to me have been without any technology whatsoever. So if I move on to this next slide, this is far from a complete list, but it's hopefully just to give you a sense that depending on the type of audience you're talking to, the type of engagement you're having with them in line with the presentation landscape, these are some of the tools that you might want to consider beyond PowerPoint. So for informal presentations, you know what? Using a tablet, using SlideShark, it's a really powerful way of doing it. I love chatting with people and sharing some of the visuals to help support my message, using back of a napkin or a whiteboard, or using my phone. I had a brilliant presentation delivered to me using nothing more than an iPhone, and it was really powerful because the technology hadn't got in the way of the presenter and me and the engagement that we were having. So think beyond PowerPoint. Think about the tools that you have sat in front of you at your desk, but at the same time, never forget that in terms of formal things, PowerPoint is a great way, really powerful, strong way of presenting to those formal environments. Demonstrations and demoing things is, again, a really powerful way of engaging with formal audiences. A very quick story, we work with a brick manufacturer, a housing brick manufacturer here in the UK, and we were developing a presentation for them, and they said, don't worry about the pictures, we've got some really high-res pictures of our housing bricks, and so we can give you loads of these and they'll look great on the screen. And we said, you know what, I don't think that's going to work. I think you need to hand the bricks out there so people can feel them and touch them. And they went, that's a great idea. So we now have a sales team, a brick sales team, dragging bags of bricks around the UK as part of their formal presentation. So I don't think I'm particularly popular with that team, but in terms of audiences, they get to touch and feel the stuff that's being talked about, and that is really powerful. Remote, well, we talked about Webinarr, that's the most obvious thing, but obviously Brainshark, Joan and her team have created some incredibly powerful tools that mean that we can engage remotely, not just live like this, but also after the fact as well. And they can still be engaged, they can still ask questions, they can still respond to the ideas that you're sharing. So back in the day, remote presentations were always a bit of an afterthought. Now they can be a key part of your presentation strategy. And finally, but in my opinion, the area that most of us can move to quite quickly is using our tools to interact with our audiences more effectively. Using whiteboards is a great way of doing it. If I had time, I'd share with you a story about a software company that had a very technical presentation, and we decided that whiteboard was the best way of them sharing that information. Not PowerPoint, not a demo, just whiteboarding. And that was down to the quality of the content. But PowerPoint can be a really interactive tool as well. Tablets can be really interactive. Allowing, SlideShark, we keep talking about it, but it's a fantastic tool and allows people to sit around an iPad and engage with an audience like they never have before. And that in itself is just very, very powerful. Being very aware of time, I'll run through this very quickly, but this is a kind of a strange slide to share. This is our business strategy. This is Eyeful's strategy on how we like to work with our customers. And it's less about, at the very start, when we work with a customer, we tend to do a lot of slides for them. They'll give us a gazillion slides and we'll make them look great and we'll make them animate beautifully and all of that good stuff. But what we really want to do is actually add greater value to our customer by producing less slides and giving them more value in the way that they're engaging with their audiences. And sometimes that's whiteboards, sometimes that's SlideShark, sometimes that's a whole bunch of different things. But the less slides we create, the more value, bizarrely, we end up delivering to our customers. And if you're responsible for presentations within your business, I wanted to share this graph with you because I think this is almost a personal strategy that you might want to work to. Rather than being seen as the PowerPoint expert, make yourself become the presentation expert that will include PowerPoint, but other formats as well. Okay, I said earlier that every presentation needs a strong call to action, so my strong call to action to you guys is that I really want you to start thinking differently about presentations, and hopefully some of the ideas we've shared has allowed you to do that, to just recalibrate the way you think about presentations and don't fall blindly into doing the same old thing we've done for years. That will then allow you to start acting differently, and then off the back of that ultimately delivering your presentation and engaging with your audiences in a slightly different way. If you're unlucky and you're not one of the guys to go out there and win a book, then they are readily available. So feel free to fill your boots. That would be marvelous. And kidding apart, as you can probably tell, I am passionate about presentations. I love talking about them. I love sharing ideas and hearing new ideas from people just like you who are in the thick of presentations day in, day out. So please don't be a stranger. I would love it if you got in touch. And I think that's it. Sharon, over to you and any questions.
So what we would like to do at this point is bring Joan in to see if she has any final comments or questions, and then we'll open it up.
I want to leave as much time as possible for questions for Simon because I see they're coming streaming in. So in a moment, I'd like to announce the winners of Simon's book. And I want to thank everyone for this session today. And the reason that we wanted to bring you Simon's presentation is, the solutions that we offer are really for both the average business presenter and some of you presentation experts that I see are online today. And our solutions are really designed to help the everyday presenter deliver their presentations more effectively over the web and be more engaging, whether you're trying to reach your audience on demand at a different time or live and remotely at the same time. So with that, Sharon, could you take us to the list of winners? The winners are, and you can see your names here, Fern, Carlin, James, Patty, and Martin. You'll receive a copy of Martin's book. So if you could please send an email to, actually, Sharon, what's the email that they should reply back to with their mailing address?
It would be webinars@presentationexpert.com. I will put it in the chat so everybody has it directly.
Great. And just send us your mailing address, all 5 of you, and we'll get that book out to you.
One of the things, Rick had a question. What advice can you give about the use of humor in technical presentations for scientists?
Humor is a double-edged sword. As you probably picked up, I love it. And have often found myself in some tricky situations where my humour hasn't been appropriate. I think humour in any presentations, technical or not, is down to judging your audience, and that's where that audience heat map piece is so valuable. Because if you know you're dealing with a pretty factual audience, and there isn't, and they really are sort of ticking boxes rather than necessarily wanting to embrace you properly, then tread carefully with your with the humour. But I think that goes for any presentation, technical or otherwise. Technical presentations, as I think I probably touched on before, the biggest issue actually is down to content and the vast amount of content that people try and shove into a presentation. If you've got a strong message, like I say, your content will kind of choose itself, and that's really powerful.
We have a question from Matt from Indianapolis. What is the best way to keep students engaged? How do you keep the presentations both informative and yet not lose them?
Yeah, it's about planning. All of the praise you get from at the end of a good presentation is because you've done the really unglamorous stuff at the start. So you've thought about your audience, you've planned it, you've planned structure and what have you. I talk in the book about the use of something called hammocking in the presentation, which is, and you tend to see this in conferences, where if there's a long presentation, somebody will throw a video in kind of about a third of the way into the presentation, really as much to try and keep people awake. And that is a sure sign that the presentation has not been really engaging for an audience. Because if you're having to throw in these gimmicks just to keep them on side, you're probably not really delivering on what you needed to do. If you think, the obvious example is, if you think about the last movie you went to go and see, yeah, some of the movies these days are 2.5 hours long. If it's a great movie, the time flies by. If you're having a great conversation with an old friend, the time flies by. So if you're creating content that's relevant to, and it's all about relevance to an audience, if it's relevant to the audience and it's structured in a way that keeps them engaged, then you don't need to use those gimmicks.
We have a good question from Janice. She said, how do you convince someone of the value of a call to action when they just think it's an informational presentation?
It's a good question. Thanks, Janice. I will always sort of respond to that with, why are they there? Why are they carving an hour or half an hour, whatever time it might be, out of their diary and spending time sat listening to you? There must be a reason for them doing that. And even for internal presentations, even if the team is told to be in this room at a particular time, they can mentally switch off very, very easily. So if you've developed a presentation that's had them engaged, you're obviously sharing something of value to them. And it might be an information share about something as kind of day-to-day as new health and safety procedures within the business. But the call to action as a result of that information being shared is that they are aware of those new health and safety procedures and that they follow them in their day-to-day workplace. And so for me, there is always a call to action. And kind of, if there isn't one, then there probably is a question over why you're presenting to that audience in the first place. Sounds really strong and kind of harsh, but that will be the question I would ask.
Rosie has a question or a comment. Do you not think that the idea of a presentation has gotten lost in the creation of PowerPoint slides, and that the whole point of the presentation sometimes get lost? You're concentrated more on the technology.
Sorry, what was that lady's name?
Her name is Rosie.
Rosie, I couldn't have put it better myself. That's absolutely 100% right. Which is why we start all of our presentations on paper, because we kind of don't know where we're going to end up. I sort of referenced a technical presentation where we thought we were going to go down the PowerPoint route, and we very, very quickly identified that was not going to happen. It was not appropriate to the audience. And so we took, at the time, quite brave decision to end up creating a whiteboard presentation for that client to use. And it comes down to the fundamental thing you just said there, which is the presentation isn't about the slides. It's not even about you, the presenter. It's about the audience and the information they take on board and the action they take as a result of the information they've taken on board. And so you're absolutely right. Sort of forget PowerPoint exists until you know what you want to share and how best to share that.
So Sharon has a question. How do you analyze the audience when your demand generation team sends the invitation to a very range of job titles? I'm sure a lot of us have that question.
Absolutely, yeah. And the audience heat map is it's a bit of a luxury. I have to say that we get to work on projects that allow us to really sort of get into the guts of the presentation, understand the audience, do all of that good stuff. But in terms of responding quickly, I need these slides and I need them in 2 hours, you kind of have to just get into the exercise of saying, okay, I've got 3 quick questions. Who is the audience? Why are they listening to you? And what do you want to get out of it? And if you can ask those quick questions, off the back of that, you've at least got the presenter and equipped yourself with a little bit more content on the audience and the purpose of the presentation than you would have had beforehand.
You know, isn't it also about presenter confidence, that lots of presenters are reluctant to present, and that kind of comes through? They're terrified of both informal and interactive presentations, and if they don't have that confidence, how are they going to connect with their audience and deliver what they need to deliver?
I think there's a big chunk of that. You're absolutely right, and if you can. I'm not a confident presenter. Whilst I'm passionate about what I'm talking about, yeah, I'm like a jelly in a high wind every time I stand in front of an audience or do an event like this. But I sort of get over myself a little bit by knowing that I've got so much that I want to share. And because the content's there, probably my biggest challenge is about making sure that I share it in the most appropriate way that then allows people to do something with it. But you're absolutely right. Confidence, not so much in the knowledge, in the information, but in their ability to share it is probably the big thing.
Simon, we have a question from Daniel. Have you ever read The Health Brothers Made to Stick?
Yeah, great book. Fantastic book. It takes a bit of reading. It's not an easy read, but the Heath brothers are really impressive in just sort of breaking down what I think we all knew in terms of all of this communication thing goes back to cavemen and us grunting at each other and communicating and sharing ideas between us. What we've done over time is we've made things kind of more complex than they need to be. But in the end, it's just about making sure that you use the tools available to you to make sure that you deliver a message that sticks. And yeah, the big takeaway from me from Made to Stick, which is a great book, well, I'd recommend reading it, is that it's about making your message sticky enough, making it clear enough, so not that just your audience takes it on board, but they can then share it with their colleagues, friends, and what have you. That's the true measure of a clear piece of communication.
I think there was a theme through some of the questions, so let me try and summarize it. I mean, smartphones, regular, the mobile learning, mobile presenting has really, really changed. I remember, a few years ago when we were really excited to be able to show it on a Palm Trio phone a long time ago. Now we're really having to think about, will somebody use or view a presentation on a mobile phone? Does that change the way you build everything? Is there a specific way that you need to engage that audience? Any tips or tricks?
Yeah, I think I remember actually going the other way, bizarrely. I remember preparing for a presentation that I thought was going to be interactive and very cozy. And I thought it was going to be me and a guy who I'd agreed to meet at a large hotel chain. He was sort of marketing director of this large hotel chain, and he said, yeah, pop over, we'll have a coffee and talk it through. So I thought, great, it's going to be a really interactive presentation. I got there and he said, you're on in 5 minutes, you're presenting to the European board in a really formal sort of way, and it was like, wow, okay. The key thing was the story was the same. All I had to do was just sort of dial it up in terms of the way I delivered the message, but the story, the structure, the key message and the call to action was the same. It was just I had to present it in a slightly more formulaic, formalized way than a cozy chat. And you'll know, on the other hand, I've had the situation where I wanted to be engaging, I was on the receiving end, I was the audience, and somebody had done a wonderful job in building rapport, and we had a wonderful, wonderful conversation, and then halfway through she ruined it and could have cost herself the deal, because she was selling to me, by then saying, right, I now need to go through my PowerPoint slides with you, and she clicked through them one after the other, and it was all really dreadful, formulaic, horrible slides anyway, but the most important thing is it broke that connection she had built and worked really hard at building with me, the audience. So you sort of ebb and flow with it, you spot the opportunities, and if you've got a great, strong story, then you can go for it, sort of no matter what your audience throws at you.
We have kind of a comment from Glenda, and I think we're really out of time for additional questions. Glenda says, you don't build a house without a blueprint. You don't create a presentation without an outline.
Perfect. And if that's the Glenda I think it is, then yeah, then yeah, perfect. Yeah, just Glenda knows this stuff, and it's a perfect way of summarizing this entire process.
I agree. I want to thank everyone for coming today. We just want to let you know that the next 2 webinars we have on our calendars are Ken Millay, including multimedia in your presentation or webinar, and Nolan Hams with data design. So thank you so much. Check your email for a recording link. You can also visit us either on our website, Google+. So I want to thank everyone for coming. Thanks both to Simon and Joan and everyone who joined us. This was a very engaged audience, and we really appreciate it. And have a great day.